Usually when I know I'm going to be teaching on Sunday, I'll have some friends that they don't know it, but in conversations, I'm just kind of bouncing ideas off of them. And that happened this week, and I knew I wanted to start this teaching with having you to consider a question. And so I bounced it off of one of my friends, and I said, hey, what's the greatest gift you've ever received? He said, well, Jesus, what's yours? And okay, Mother Teresa. So it kind of changed the way I want to ask this question, because I assume you're all going to say, well, Jesus. So here's the question. What's the second greatest gift you've ever received? What is it? When you think about the gifts you've been given in your life, no matter what it is, what would you say is the second greatest gift? Jesus? Then the other gift. What would that be? Right? It's the type of gift that you look at and it's more than just the gift, right? Surely it's a material thing, right? But it's more than just a material thing. Like this gift you've been given that's kind of transcended. It's not just an item that sits there, right? It's not just maybe even an action, but that item or action is pointing towards maybe how the giver of the gift feels about you, the way they've thought about you, the way they know you. It is a gift, but what makes it so special is it's more than a gift. It points towards something deeper, something bigger. It's more than what meets the eye. Now, when I start to think about my second best gift I've ever received, I start to think of my son, Ezra, and in my relationship with my grandpa and how that all comes together. Back in November 2017, once we found out that we were going to have a boy, which was a huge sigh of relief for me, about passed out when I found out we were going to have a girl. We wanted to name him Ezra. We knew that. There's these strong reasons biblically and mine and my wife's passions. We wanted to name him Ezra. And we thought, a little bit about the middle name. What will that be? And finally we landed on Lowell, Lowell. So he's Ezra Lowell because my grandfather's first name was Lowell. And I had a special relationship with my grandfather. A year ago at his funeral, I said he was undoubtedly the person who treated me with the most love and respect I've ever had in my life. And that's no knock to anybody living. It's just more of the shining light my grandfather was to me. Just the investment he made on my life was second to none. And so one day we call him, and he picks up the phone, and I said, hey, Grandpa, how you doing? He's like, good, how are you? And I said, hey, I just want to let you know some news. And he said, okay, what's that? And I said, we're going to name our son Ezra. And he said, okay, that sounds great. And I said, but we're going to, have his middle name be Lowell, as a way to honor you and the way you've invested in me. And you could tell emotionally he was just moved by this. He wasn't he's an ex-military guy, and he wasn't deeply emotional with his own children, but with me, he would always tell me he loved me. He'd always hug me, and we had this special bond. And so he's a little, teared up on the phone, and a couple of days later, he calls me and says, hey, are you going to be home in a couple days? Now, we lived in Maryland at the time, and my grandma and grandpa lived in central Indiana, where I grew up. And so that was about a 600-mile drive. And they were in their mid-80s. I was kind of wondering what's going on. He said, will you just be home in a few days? Yeah, sure, I'll be home in a few days. Which is weird. That's not the schedule I operate on, but you retired people are different in how you measure things. And so a few days later, I hear the dogs barking, and I look outside, and there's Grandpa's truck, and he's backing it up towards the house because there's something he has in the back covered up. It kind of looks like this, right? And I think, what's this about? And Grandma and Grandpa, they spring out of the truck as if they're 20 years old and it was a 2-hour drive. And they're just, hey, buddy, how you doing? And I said, well, I'm doing good. What are you doing, right? In their mid-80s. And so he said, well, we got something for you here in the back. And I said, okay. My grandpa says, before I show you what it is, he goes on to tell me this story, and he says, you remember all those farms I owned when you were growing up? And I said, yeah. He said, you remember your favorite farm? I said, yeah, the one with the big tree. And there's the only tree on the whole property, and I remember he would work that farm for hours, work that land for hours, And he tied a rope swing for me, and so I would spend some summer days just swinging on that rope swing. And when I got tired of that big old tree would serve as my backstop as I worked on my fastball. I just hit that tree, go pick it up, hit that tree. And one of the lower branches was about 10 feet high, give or take. And I had my basketball with me, and so when I get tired of swinging or throwing the baseball, I'd take that basketball. And I would shoot over that limb. I was pretending to be my favorite Hoosier of all time, Damon Bailey. And I would just shoot over there, go and grab it, come shoot over it, go grab it. And that was special for me. And Grandpa said, I know, but I do want to let you know we sold that farm. I said, okay, I understand. And he said, but before I sold that farm, I went and I cut down that tree. I said, okay. And he said, I took that tree back home to my mill, and I turned it into boards. And I sanded those boards for hours, and I smoothed that wood out. I cut those pieces just how I wanted. And he said, and then I started to build something for you. And he said, out of that favorite tree where you have all those memories, he said, I made you a crib for you, or a bassinet for you to rock your son Ezra Lowell to sleep in. And I was blown away. This is a gift. But you see how it's more than a gift. Like to some people, they may look at this and just say, oh, that's just a bassinet. You may even come up and be able to find flaws in it, right? Well, I'd have done this differently, I'd have done this differently. But what I see is more than a material gift. It's transcendent. I mean, even when I just pulled that off for you guys, I felt those emotions welling up in me because although it's a gift, it points to something deeper. It's more than just meets the eye for me. This gift is always pointing towards something deeper. And the story that we're going to talk about today, it's one that in Christ's life where he encounters a gift. And everybody else, it seems like it's just a gift. But it's actually more than a gift. Yeah, it's material, but it's more than just material. It's transcendent. It's pointing towards something deeper, something bigger. It's more than meets the eye. And if you want to follow along, Jesus encounters this gift in Mark chapter 14. And I do want you to know that ahead of time, that as we get into the first couple of verses of Mark here, there are some items that historically, we kind of have to unpack together. And I didn't really think it through that you all would be on one less hour of sleep, but we'll get through it, right? And it will matter, these things you unpack. But Mark begins chapter 14 this way. He says, it was now 2 days before Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. Now, one thing that I admire most about the Jewish religion is that they have these requirements to slow down and to reflect on God's past faithfulness. These moments where they have to kind of slow down and to think about God's faithfulness in their story. They got to look back and reflect. And Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread were two opportunities where you were mandated to consider the way that God has shown himself to be for you. Now, it's not mandated for us, but I would encourage you, when you're going through tough times, take out a piece of paper and just jot down some of the ways that God has shown up for you in the past. Just take and jot down kind of his resume on your life. Because you'd be surprised, how in your momentary troubles can seem so big. But when you look back, you realize God's been faithful before. He's probably slayed bigger giants in your life than what you're up against now. There's this power as we reflect upon God's past faithfulness in our life. There's this power as we look back and remember all those ways that God has shown he is for us. And for the Jews, Passover and the Festival of Unleavened Bread, it provided those opportunities. And in Passover, it was just this one-night celebration. And the faithfulness that the Israelites were remembering is the night that they were freed from Egyptian slavery. This slavery that they endured for over 400 years. And he gets the term Passover because God told the people, they've been in slavery for 400 years, he said, I'm going to free you. Right, but here's what I want you to do. He says, I want you to take the blood of a lamb, right, and put it on your door, and death will pass over you. And then this blood somehow, some way, is going to just not give them life, but give them freedom. It's going to give them hope that generations of the Israelites never thought was coming. And then once being granted their freedom, the Israelites had to leave so fast that they wouldn't even have time for their unleavened bread to rise. The yeast wouldn't even have enough time to work its way through the dough. Thus, you have the festival of unleavened bread and Passover. And at the time of Mark's writing, Israel had about 20,000 people in it. But during the Passover and during the festival, the city would swell to about 150,000 people. And if you want to know what that's going to feel like, just wait until April 8th when we have the eclipse. There's a lot of outsiders coming in, folks. Get your toilet paper and your bread and your gas, because it's going to be something. And just as quickly as it swells here, it's going to empty out. And so Mark says that 2 days before Passover and the festival of the unleavened bread, that the leading priests and the teachers of religious law, so the Jewish leaders, were still looking for an opportunity to capture Jesus secretly and kill him. And for us, that seems like obviously a bad thing to do. What's your problem with Jesus? Well, Jesus, as the Son of God, came to set things right the way that God had intended them to be. And these religious leaders, they were so full of hypocrisy, and God doesn't expect perfection from any of us. But they weren't even trying to work on their hearts. They were ugly inside, but they'd point out everybody else's flaws. That they were hypocrites, and then they formed all of the religion around their own hypocrisy, and the whole religion was a sham. And by Jesus coming and pointing this out, sometimes even bluntly so, it threatened them financially. It threatened their popularity. It took away all of their security. Because God came Jesus came to right the wrongs and to set things the way that God intended them. So this group, they're looking for ways, they're trying to leverage moments. How can we get rid of this guy? He's too big of a threat to us. And finishing out that second verse there, it says that as they're discussing this, said, but not during the Passover celebration, because the people may riot. And for good sense they would riot, because Jesus was kind of a local celebrity at this point. We're getting towards the end of his 3-year public ministry. And then so people would have heard about him. Some of them would have seen his miracles. And as everybody's coming in to celebrate Passover in this festival, they knew Jesus would be there too. They knew people would be there to see Jesus. And if you're going to try to remove him, you probably shouldn't do it when you're outnumbered by about 150,000 people. So this is the scene when Jesus arrives in Bethany, which is a town just 2 short miles outside of the Jerusalem city gates. Everybody there is focusing on God's faithfulness. They're preparing to reflect on the moments where the blood saved them and gave them life and freedom. The text continues. It says, meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume, made from the essence of nard. She broke open the jar and poured the perfume over Jesus' head. Now, for what it's worth, we should really think about this as more of a Gatorade bath surprise than this premeditated, special, holy ceremony. I mean, the woman may have thought, I know Jesus is coming, I know what I'm going to do when he gets here, I can't help myself. But for everybody around them, this is kind of this spontaneous moment. It may have been spontaneous altogether, we don't know. What we do know is it catches everybody off guard when she pulls out the alabaster jar. Would have been this 11-ounce little jar that was made of this white kind of translucent stone, and she would have broken it over and just poured the whole jar on his head. Now, when you come to follow Jesus, you just don't know what things like nard mean. I had a wild Wednesday in my office reading about the essence of nard. It was a hoot. You'd have loved it. And what I found out was a few things about nard that are pretty special. And the first thing is that the essence of nard, is meant to be used in moderation. It's considered kind of an oil-based perfume more than a water-based one. Some scholars, they described it as this. They said, a little bit could go a long way because it had the ability to cling to the skin. And I didn't know that's a way to describe perfume, but I've been around some people that I would describe their smell that way. It just stings the nostrils. It does, right? And it was also costly. It was very expensive in this first century culture, mainly because of the travel it would take to get to it. This plant that it's from, the essence of nard, right, it came from the Himalayan mountains, kind of grown in a very specific spot, right, where the Himalayan mountains kind of run into China and India, right, on that threshold, on that line. And so that day and age, to get 3,000 miles then up a mountain to get this, it was hard to get. If you're interested in getting the essence of nard for your home, you can get it on Amazon, and you can get it by Wednesday if you order within the next 7 hours. First service may have put them out of it. I don't know. If you need to get on it if you want it, right? But it was expensive too. Most importantly, though, when you dig into why this was so valuable and what it was used for, is that the most popular use for the essence of nard was to anoint the dead for burial. You wanted something that could respect the body by clinging to the skin and giving a pleasant odor as people are preparing to bury somebody. And in the Jewish, we do things pretty quick when somebody goes to the other side. The Jews wouldn't. It was often that there would be 7 days where they would just sit in silence and just kind of reflect on their loss and mourn and the grief they're going through. So it was important to have this essence of nard that could last a little bit, could go a long way. It could put off an appropriate smell. And so this woman, right, she knows the value in this bottle, this little 11-ounce thing. But her actions reveal that she's not thinking about the value because what she sees in front of her is more valuable. Yeah, there's some worth here, but man, there's Christ right there. And so she dumps the whole thing on his head, and it elicits quite the response from some of those gathered together. Mark says some of those at the table were indignant. So they're annoyed to the point of being angry about it. And you can imagine the tone in these next words. Why waste such expensive perfume? It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And so they scolded her harshly. Now, we wouldn't think, but it's true that there's some who were indignant, who are angry and annoyed and berating her and scolding her. We wouldn't think that they're the people closest to Jesus, but they were. The some who can't stand this woman's actions were the disciples. And I try to put myself in their shoes. If you ever want to study the Bible in kind of a creative way, I try to read a story and then think through what I would do from each side of it. And it helps me kind of retain the biblical truths there that are present. And I think the disciples here, I don't want to say they should be scolding her, but you think about it, they kind of have a point here. When you take the value of that bottle and you kind of put it into today's currency, she just dumped out $15,000. Right there, $15,000. And I think if you gave $15,000 to the person next to you and you said, hey, do me a favor, here's $15K, go make a difference in our community. And if they came back to you and said, you would not believe what I paid for this perfume, you would be indignant. You'd be saying, that could have been used for so much good, and you bought perfume, and they would say, but it clings to the skin. And you wouldn't be satisfied, would you? So when we put ourselves, kind of in the disciples', shoes there, flip-flop sandals, whatever, when we put ourselves in their spot, they do kind of have a point. Especially because Passover and the festival, there's increased giving to the poor. So they're thinking, why waste such a gift? Unless this is about more than the gift. Unless it's not just about the gift, but there's more that meets the eye. And unless this gift is pointing to something bigger, something deeper. And everybody else is frustrated. They don't get it. Only Jesus understands it. And to the disciples' kind of annoyed resentment, Jesus replies and says, leave her alone. Why criticize her for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, and you can help them whenever you want, but you will not always have me. And this was a frequently for Jesus and the disciples. And I think part of their following him, which I don't want to take the courage or faith out of it, but part of them following Jesus is they thought Jesus came to kind of separate the Israelites from the Roman rule. And God had separated them from Egypt and the oppression once. Is he going to separate them from the Roman oppression this time? And Jesus kept hinting to them, even flat out telling them at times, guys, I'm not going to be around much longer. This is my ministry. Here's where I'm headed. The cup that God has given me is ending on the cross. But they didn't get it. They didn't want to believe it because in their mind, they thought Jesus was going to the top politically. And if Jesus is going to the top, guess who he's bringing with him? Those closest to him, his disciples. So they're not even aware of what Jesus is talking about right here. It would have been a confusing moment for him. Why are you wasting such? What are you doing? That could have been used for money. What are you talking about, Jesus? And he continues. He says, she has done what she could and has anointed my body for burial ahead of time. I tell you the truth. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. And it is. Jesus reveals that this moment was about so much more than a gift. He's saying this moment was pointing to something greater. What seemed to be this woman's simple actions was actually pointing everybody in the room towards the cross. So while everyone is gathering in Jerusalem to remember God's faithfulness through Passover, this moment in time where when the blood of the Lamb gave them life and freedom, it was just a few days later, Jesus, the perfect Son of God, would shed his blood on a cross. And on that cross, he would show people forever that God is undoubtedly for you. To the extent that God gave up his one and only Son so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. His blood would bring us freedom. That generous moment in Bethany, it was about this material gift. But it was about more than the gift. It was pointing to the cross. And when we talk about this story, when we teach this story, the question that's always worth asking is, what are we doing in our everyday lives to point people towards the cross? What are we doing in our everyday lives and our actions and behaviors which seem routine, but they're actually pointing to something deeper? Like, what are we doing to show people that God is undoubtedly for them? A powerful example in my life is when I was this punk teenager in high school. From a very dark and broken family, and part of the reason I think that I had such a great relationship with my grandpa is he looked to get me out of that situation every way possible. He was the dad I never had. But in high school I was just this drugged out punk who didn't have his life together. But there's a substitute teacher that would come in, a guy probably in his early 30s. And he treated me with just unbelievable kindness. Unbelievable kindness. Like the kindness, I think you know what I'm talking about. It's not just where people are nice, where you can tell it's almost supernatural kindness. They're so kind to you, you know it's coming from somewhere else. And for me, that punk kid, that was kindness I had never encountered, kindness I didn't think I deserved. And then that substitute teacher, he kept it quiet. But I found out that he was also the local youth pastor. And although I didn't believe in all of this, everything that we believe in, I didn't believe any of that at the time. But I started going to youth group. And the students at youth group treated me so well, better than I've ever been treated in my life. And I kept thinking, like, what is it about these people that they treat me so well? It was a gift to me, the way that they treated me. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but it wasn't just about their kindness. It wasn't just about their intentionality. What I didn't know is that was pointing to something deeper. The way that they were treating me were pointing me towards the cross, where I could see God's love for me displayed. The way they were treating me, it was more than meets the eye. Through their actions, they were showing me that God is undoubtedly for me. And you guys, that was eye-opening. I was a punk teenager. When I got in the baptistry when I was a teenager, this is not a joke, right? I get in there, and that youth pastor looks me dead in the eyes, and he says, "You sure you want to do this?" I said, "I'm sure I want to do this." He said, "Well, normal people, we dunk once, but you've been so bad we have to dunk you twice." And I said, "Whatever it takes." They only dunked me once. But growing up, life was so traumatic that I didn't believe in a God. And if I did, I wouldn't think he's for me. But the way those people treated me proved something different about our God. My friend and I, we have the same tattoo guy. Your pastor has a tattoo guy. Jeff's covered in him. You wouldn't believe it when he takes his shirt off. But my don't prove them wrong. But my buddy, he spends a lot more time around our tattoo guy. I think the tattoos are just an excuse for him to spend time with this guy. And several years ago, when we started this relationship with this artist, he didn't believe in any of this. He thought it was all just crazy, just smoke and mirrors, just fairy tales and lies. But my buddy spends so much time with him and is so intentional with him, is so kind to him. And then the artist thinks, you're just being intentional. You're just being kind. What he didn't know at first, but he's starting to see it, is that it's not just about being kind and gentle and patient. It's not just about being inclusive. My buddy, with his actions, is pointing this guy to something else, something greater, something deeper. He's pointing them to the cross. He's showing them through my actions, like, God is for you. And multiple times every single day, you and I have the chance to point people towards Jesus and his love for them displayed on the cross. We have the chance to gift people with the truth that God is for them. And where it gets tough is that, just like the woman in the story, it will take us sacrificing something that we find extraordinarily valuable. Resources that you can't just recreate. Time. And energy. And I get it, we're all burning the candle at both ends with time and energy. It's not something we have much of. It is our most valuable resource we have in our possession. But it could just start in your home. Put away your distractions and give your children your undivided attention. Moms and dads, you have no idea how through the way you treat your children, the way you give them attention, is forming their first opinion about God. It could be about your spouse. Just putting away the distractions and gifting them with your time and with your energy. You may see them and they're listening to worship songs and they have their nose in their devotional every morning. But there are going to be times when life hits them so hard, or their insecure thoughts start to take root, and they look at their life and they wonder if God is still for them. And through your time and energy, you can always be pointing them back towards the cross, revealing their worth and their value. It may be your coworkers. Maybe it's that coworker. And some of you know what I'm talking about. And it's so much easier to show up at our jobs and keep our head down and work for the paycheck. It's easier just to kind of get through the day, get in, get out, get paid. But what if we treated people in those moments in such a way that they see that not just we are for them, but God is for them? What if we displayed just supernatural patience with some of these people? If we just keep taking an interest in their life to where they wonder, what is different about us? They think it's just about the kindness, the patience, the interest. But you're pointing them towards something else, something deeper. There's more than meets the eye. You're pointing them towards God's love displayed on the cross. By you being for them, you are showing them that God is for them. And it can be anybody. You insert the blank. Right? A family member, a coworker, an acquaintance, a mom or dad that you're with a lot because your kids have the same interests. Coaches, it could be an athlete on your team. It could be a student you go to school with, whoever it is. But there are these people in our lives who have real souls and face a real eternity. It's our honor to serve these people so well and treat them so well, they ask why. Why do you treat me so well? Why do you care so much? Why are you so kind to me? Why do you give so much? And we answer it and we say it's because of Jesus. We show them that this whole time there's been more than meets the eye. You know, there are people in our lives, you can all probably name 4 or 5 of them, people in our life who we know have walked away from a belief in God because of how Christians have treated them. We all know those people. But the opposite's true. The way we treat people can walk them towards belief in God. Because yes, it's about how we treat them, but it's about more than how we treat them. It's treating them in such a way that points to something deeper, something bigger. We're pointing them towards the love of God displayed on the cross. And I know what Satan would love in this moment. He'd love to whisper to you, well, that's not your responsibility. God has a plan for those people in your life. God has a plan for them. And if Satan's whispering that, he's exactly right. God has a plan for them. And you are the plan. The people in my life, I'm the plan. It's my responsibility to show them I've been loved so well by God and by Christ that I love them well. I'm loving them and treating them towards the cross. That's our mission to do it for others. It's our responsibility to show them Jesus. And when we do, they get abundant life. They get freedom because of his blood. And they may not know it yet, but when you ask them, what's the greatest gift you've ever received? They will say, it's Jesus. They will. Let me pray for us.